Today I want to go through this sketchbook of mine. It's a sketchbook that I've taken with me on many travels that I've been around Japan. It's a plein air sketchbook, and plein air paintings are basically paintings that you do when you sit down in the place and just paint what's in front of you, like the scenery or the people walking by, stuff like that. So I just wanted to go through it and sort of show the different places and talk about how I got there and tell some stories of each of the places I've been. By the way, these stickers on the cover are by an artist I really like called Gumi, who makes these really beautiful pastel collage type illustrations. I'll go ahead and link Gumi's Instagram in the description below. So I started this sketchbook in June of 2020, right in the midst of the beginning of the pandemic. A friend and I decided to go to Kyoto because we thought, because of the pandemic, it will be much less crowded and there will be much fewer tourists. And we were definitely right. There were much fewer people there. On the first day that we went, we visited this sort of lake beach. Because Kyoto is in the mainland, it doesn't have any ocean beaches, but it does have this lake with a kind of beach. It's called Omimaiko, but unfortunately the day that we went was really cloudy and rainy and kind of cold, so we didn't go in the water, but I did sit and do this quick watercolor illustration. So this is from the same trip to Kyoto. I went to this beautiful old temple called Byodo-in, which is also called the Phoenix Hall, I'm pretty sure. I entered the park area and sat down to paint the temple. I only painted the sky when very quickly an employee came over and told me I'm not allowed to paint in this area, so I had to stop. But I left the temple grounds and walked around a little bit in the area. And I found this very beautiful river with a bridge and mountains in the background, so I decided to sit here and paint instead. The town is called Uji, by the way, very famous, and they have really good matcha there. This is back in Tokyo. I was in this place called Tokyo Dome City, but I wasn't really focused on the painting and I kind of rushed it, and I think you can tell because it didn't come out very good. This is not a plein air painting. I just wanted to paint the sort of swipe marks that I saw reflected on my iPad, so that's that. This is a place that I went with a friend kind of in the middle of nowhere. We were sitting at a Starbucks outside, and for some reason I really wanted to paint this very boring scenery of a massive store and random streets and streetlights. So I sat down and painted it. This is an area I found one day when I was riding my bike. I ended up on top of a hill where I could see this beautiful view of the city with the nice sort of sunset type clouds. So I sat down in the grass and did a little painting. This is another interesting place that I found when I was riding my bike. It's an old electrical building from World War II, and I thought it was interesting that they had sort of kept it over the years, and there was a flower garden nearby. I thought it was an interesting place, so I decided to paint it as well. This next one is one of my favorite parts of Japan. It's this area called Okutama, basically a bunch of mountains that are in western Tokyo. There's many different hiking trails and also a beautiful river, or I guess a ravine, that runs throughout the mountains. I like to go there pretty often. On this day, I had been hiking for about 4 hours, and when I finished, I came to this lake with a dam. It's surrounded by mountains, very beautiful, and so it was a nice way to sort of relax after walking all day. This is another one of my favorite places in Japan. It's a park called Showa Kinen Koen, or Showa Memorial Park. This day I went with a friend, and even though it was a bit rainy, we sat and painted some people in boats in a lake. So this is a cafe that I went to with my friend. This is her. Her name is Efrat. Usually when I say I went somewhere with a friend, it's usually with her. we often go to different places together and we like to sit and paint the scenery together. You should definitely check out her YouTube channel. I'll post a link to it in the description. On this day, we went to a very unique cafe in Asakusa, and so we stayed there for a few hours and just painted the inside of the cafe. So this is a trip that I went on in the autumn of 2020 with my friend Efrat. We were in this place called Nikko. We decided to go to a place a bit outside of the touristy area that has more mountains and fields and more nature. So this was one of the days that we were walking through the fields and we sat down and painted the scenery. This was another day from our trip to Nikko, where we were visiting a temple, and so we painted the scenery of the gate to the temple with some mountains and a lake in the background. This is the last one from my trip to Nikko, where we found a very small shrine. It's so small that it's just these little stone structures here with the gate and some beautiful fall foliage in the background, so we sat and painted it. This is another strange cafe that I found with my friend Efrat. They had a lot of unique decorations and lots of plants, so we sat for a few hours and painted it. This is from a trip that I went on by myself to Himeji, which is in Hyogo-ken in central Japan. I visited this castle, very famous Himeji Castle. This was again during one of the COVID lockdowns, so I ended up being one of the very few people walking around the castle, which was nice, but it was also a bit lonely. Still very beautiful though. This was also from my trip to Himeji. I wanted to see some more famous temples that were on top of a mountain, and so I hiked there and sat and did a painting. This is the last one from my trip to Himeji and Hyogo-ken. On this day I went to Kobe and it was very cold and started snowing, so I sat inside of this Starbucks that had a very beautiful panoramic view of the port, so I just stayed there for a few hours and painted the scenery. This is another one of my favorite parks in Japan. It's called Sayama Koen. It's a very big, sprawling park with lots of bike paths and walking paths, and I love the view of the train tracks and, the houses and cities and the hills in the distance. There's also a beautiful lake on the other side, not in this painting, where sometimes you can see Mount Fuji, and I also like that you can see the Ferris wheel in the background. This is another park that I visited with my friend Efrat. It's called Korakuen. It was a bit chilly this day, but we went and we saw some plum trees and sat down and did a painting. This was during the sakura season, obviously, of last year, 2021. I had gotten some new paint colors, especially this pink, and so I went to this park, which is another one of my favorite parks in Japan, called Kogane Koen, and I sat and painted the flowers. On this day, there were many people sitting, having picnics, and an old Japanese man came up to me and said that he had also been painting the sakura trees, and he showed me his painting, which was of course much better than mine, but he was very sweet. This was also during the sakura season of 2021. I went back to Sayama Koen and painted the beautiful flowers there. So this is another one of my favorite parts of Japan. It's Kamakura, a very famous place, and on this day I sat in a park where you could see a beautiful view of the ocean, the sunset, and this island called Enoshima, also very famous. Definitely worth going to if you are visiting Japan. This is another park that I visited with my friend. It's called Hitachi Kaihin Koen, or Hitachi Seaside Park. It's very famous for these blue flowers that bloom all over the hills, and when you're walking up on the paths, it really feels like you're just in a sea of these blue flowers. It's very beautiful. I highly recommend it. This was a day that I went hiking in this mountain called Mitake-san. When I finished the hike, I found a place to sit down and painted the view from the top of the mountain. On this day, I went back to Showa Kinen Koen. It's such a large park. They have so many different areas that are all connected by walking and bike paths. So I found an area I had never been to before. I believe it was like a traditional Japanese themed garden. So they had this nice pond and a bridge, and so I sat and painted. This was another day that I went hiking in this area called Kinchakuda. This one, the most challenging and most fun part was definitely painting these individual little buildings, but I really like how it came out. So this is the last trip and last 3 pages of this sketchbook. Last year, 2021, in November, I went with my friend Efrat to Kawaguchiko. It's one of the 5 lakes that surround Mount Fuji. It's also very famous, very touristy, and very beautiful. The first day that we were there, we saw this amazing sunset where Mount Fuji turned pink and purple and blue, and the sky changed colors like 10 times. And it was really beautiful, and I'm really glad that I was able to sit and paint it. This was the second day of our trip. We climbed a mountain called Mitsutoge. From the top, we were able to see Mount Fuji and paint the scenery. This is the last day of our trip and also the last page in this sketchbook. It's this shrine where people like to see Mount Fuji with the red torii gates. On this day, it was very cloudy, so we couldn't get any cool photos like that. But we did sit and sort of paint the cloudy scenery where we could still see Fuji-san a little bit, but not too much. But I enjoyed it a lot, and it was one of the best trips I've ever been on in Japan. I highly recommend Kawaguchiko or any of the places that I showed in this sketchbook. So I hope you guys enjoyed watching it. I have other sketchbooks that I'm currently working on, doing many paintings from places that I go to, and I'll make videos whenever I fill them up with sketches and paintings. So thank you so much for watching.